Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. What if autism were not a set of deficits, but a different way of being human? Whether you're autistic yourself, care for someone who is, or serve autistic individuals as your profession, you'll want to listen to this episode with Dr. Barry Prizant. Dr. Prizant is a speech-language pathologist, clinical scholar, consultant, and researcher. He co-developed the SCERTS Model, and his book, Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, has been the best-selling book on autism since 2015. Barry also co-hosts Uniquely Human, the podcast. This episode is part 2 of our conversation, and we discuss what inspired Barry to write Uniquely Human, why his book is relatable across cultures, understanding neurodivergent experiences, the importance of creating individualized support plans, hope for the future of neurodiversity, areas of autism research and support that need to change, and tips for professionals working with autistic individuals and their families. In this episode, discover what's possible when you shift the narrative. And now I present you Dr. Barry Prizant. I'd like to talk about your book, Uniquely Human. It's a very popular book in the community. First, what inspired you to write it? And then we can go into some of the details of what you have in the book.
Sure. Let me give a little bit of background first. I've written and published extensively prior to this book, but it was all pretty much in the academic literature. It was in peer-reviewed journals. Over about 10 years, we had 7 chapters in the Handbook of Autism, and it was, at that time, it was the Handbook of Autism and PDD, Pervasive Developmental Disorder, a category that is now subsumed under the category of autism. But I was, and have always been, very involved with kids and families. One thing I will mention, by the way, because it's coming up, is we've been doing a parent retreat weekend now for, in May, it'll be our 28th year that we've been doing that.
Oh.
And so I would always come home and tell my wife, who is a psychologist and a psychiatric nurse, her focus is not autism, but she collaborates with me on some projects. I would always come home and tell my wife, and then my son, who's graduating from medical school in a few months, into psychiatry. I'm just a proud father here.
Yeah.
And I would tell him stories about kids and about people that I've worked with. And many years ago, my wife said to me, well, why don't you just kind of develop some, why don't you categorize those stories, and when you come back and you met an interesting young child or a family or an interesting situation, just kind of write a little story down about what happened. So I did that for a number of years. And then I, partially based upon my wife's pushing and my son at that time, he was an older teenager at that time, said, hey, listen, you should write a book with these stories. And so I knew a lot of my writing style was academic and probably somewhat jargony, because that was how I was raised. I spent years on the medical school faculty at Brown University, and I taught mostly graduate on PhD level courses. So I was an academician, even though I was seeing kids and families all the time. So I contacted somebody who I had met through a friend, Tom Fields Meyer, who happens to be a dad of an adult on the autism spectrum, who's a professional writer and a professional, I don't know if this is actually a word, memoirist. He writes helps people write. And so I contacted Tom, and he said, sure, let's put together a proposal. And we put together a proposal, got an agent, sent it off to one of the top publishers in the world at that time, still they are, Simon & Schuster. And they said, this looks great. And this was in around 2012. And so we got the support to write this book, Uniquely Human. The full title is Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism. Coming out of what I mentioned earlier, that I thought the technical literature was not accurately portraying autistic people. And we wrote the book, and came out in 2015. And we had no expectations about the success, but it has been tremendously successful. It's published in with 27 translations in Western as well as non-Western countries. I just got the latest overall sales numbers. About 250,000 copies have been sold.
Wow.
And then and tells you a lot about the field of autism. Just a few years later, 5 years after it was published, we said, things have changed so much, we have to have an updated and expanded edition. So we got support for that, and that came out 7 years after the original edition. So in 2022, we published an expanded edition, updated and expanded edition, which is different in a lot of ways. We really tried to update kind of the language, the values. It's about 90 pages longer than the original edition. And then about 5 years ago, somebody said to me, well, you need to have a podcast, Barry. You have a way of making complex issues understandable. You present and presented publicly for decades. You have a voice that's easy to listen to. I approached a friend of mine who's an autistic audio engineer, Dave Finch, because he has a studio for doing podcasts and other audio work at the time. And so we started this podcast a little bit less than 5 years ago, and it's been tremendously successful. In podcasts, we are, and again, I'm sorry for tooting my horn, but we're very proud. We're number one in autism, number one in psychiatry, number one in ADHD, because we have a lot of people with co-occurring conditions on, and approaching 2 million downloads internationally.
Wow.
And so the last piece of all of this, and I'll get back to Uniquely Human more specifically, is we are well into the process of writing a book on neurodiversity. And a lot of what we're writing about in the book, following the same kind of lived experience format as Uniquely Human, comes from 150 episodes of our podcast, where 2/3 to 3/4 of them are guest interviews with neurodivergent people. So we are incredibly humbled that people seem to like our message. Both parents, we've gotten incredible endorsement from the autistic self-advocate community. They seem to really endorse and love our work. And we get tons of thank yous from grandparents, from parents, from autistic people. And that's something we didn't expect. The breadth of interest. Researchers love our book. I mean, it's just, and I just thank so many of my mentors, which include autistic children, adults, and families, as well as professional mentors, for kind of casting the net broadly and trying to get information out that appeals to a very wide range of people.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations on everything from the book to the other book to the podcast. What do you think it is about the book, the original book, I would say, that made it relatable to so many people across so many different languages?
Yes. Given the topic of this podcast and reaching out to many different cultures who have different values, let me just say, that's a question I ask myself all the time. Why has it been so widely embraced by people living all over the world in agricultural societies versus highly sophisticated societies, such that people have publishers from all different countries say, we need to translate this? And the only answer, and it's not a specific answer that I could come up with, is we've touched upon values that are shared values. That are shared values because they're very humanistic values. That we're talking about experiences of children and adults who are human beings. That's why I use the term uniquely human. That we have pushed back against pathologizing behaviors. And what I mean by that is putting them in the category of, these are terms that we use for years, bizarre behaviors, deviant behaviors. And we basically say these are human beings who experience things in life the same way we all do, but they're far more vulnerable. And they also have, in many cases, a problem in developing the ease of communicating that we all have if you're neurotypical, or most of us have. I think if you look at the book Uniquely Human, we talk about the fact that we all get dysregulated, but we have better coping strategies and we know how to seek out support more easily. Okay. And if you look at autistic people who've done very well in life, who have a good quality of life, I have friends who are married, they have kids, clearly autistic. Okay. And it's because people in their life knew how to support them and they found out ways to support themselves. That's why the self-advocate community is so successful, because they know how to support each other. They know how to teach people how to advocate for themselves and how to advocate for other autistic people. Some of the best work that's being done in supporting autistic people is being done by autistic people who have become professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to your question, I don't know why it's been embraced so widely. I do know that both in our SCERTS model as well as in what people now call the uniquely human approach, it somehow resonates with people who have very different religious and cultural values. So we were contacted recently by a family in Bangladesh who are interested in bringing the SCERTS model and the uniquely human approach throughout Bangladesh. I get emails from people and parents in some cases in Africa. A bunch of years ago, I did a full week of training in Guangzhou, China. It just seems that we're touching upon the human experience, plus we are in some cases validating the intuitions of parents from other cultures. Well, this is how I always saw my child, but I was told it was wrong. Or I was asked to do things that I was uncomfortable with, such as extinguishing echolalia. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we've tapped into, for parents, intuitions that they've always had about their kids, but they weren't allowed to hold those intuitions, or they were told by professionals that they were wrong. So I think that's one piece. But the same thing with professionals. Many, many professionals who were taught to extinguish behaviors or to punish kids or put them in timeout said, I always felt in my gut it wasn't the right thing to do, but I didn't have another way to look at this. And the work, and it's not just our work. I mean, people in this new kind of developmental consortium, the Coalition for Developmental and Relationship-Based Approaches, there's a lot of overlap. But I think especially the emotional regulation piece has really resonated with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And with your new book that focuses more on neurodiversity, what's the message that you want people to take away from that? Are you able to share?
Yeah, well, with the new, yeah, and we're hoping to get a draft completed by this summer and for 2017 publication. Another, actually, it's will be published by the number one publisher in the world. That's called Penguin Random House, and they have very much supported this effort. The message is, in a sense, it's more directed towards non-neurodivergent people in the world, employers, teachers, therapists, parents. And the message is we can best support neurodivergent people, whether they have an anxiety disorder or ADHD or autism. We can best support people who confuse us sometimes by the way they react and behave, by really digging deep. We call it the deep why, by really digging deep and trying to understand what their experience is.
Hmm.
So it definitely is a message of we have to listen to the neurodivergent community to really understand what their experience is to best support them. But the bottom line, and this comes from a very dear friend of mine who's internationally known in neurodiversity, his name is Michael John Carley.
Yep. He's been on the podcast.
Oh, has he been? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah. I just had dinner with Michael. He was over at my house for dinner just a few nights ago.
Oh.
He lives locally. He's a very dear friend, going back about 12 years at least. Yeah.
Mm.
And so Michael says the best way to support an autistic individual is to not to try to change their behavior, but to understand them and then change what we do. to change our attitudes, and to change the way we support them in a respectful manner based upon what their experience is, which means we have to collaborate closely with families. We have to collaborate closely with autistic people. And some of your listeners might say, oh, I wish my kid could tell me what they're experiencing, but he doesn't or she doesn't have those abilities to tell it. And then, especially professionals, but parents as well, we have to be careful observers and then change what we do and see what is working in best support of that child. And by the way, one thing that Michael says, and it's kind of based upon his lived experience, but our work, is he says emotional regulation is everything.
Right. Yeah.
And he, of course, is a brilliant man. He consults to universities and to businesses about autism and neurodiversity. And, basically what he says is, at this point in my life, I'm a published writer, author. I've published 3 books. Emotional regulation still is something I need to actively work on.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's great that you had Michael on.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's one of my go-to people when people say, who should I speak to? Or we need a consultant who's a self-advocate. I go, Michael. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He came on the show actually in our early days, and he was talking about sex education for autistic people.
Based upon one of his books. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hey, Rachel here. Do you know anyone else who might benefit from listening to this episode? Maybe an autistic person wanting to grow their community, a parent wanting to support their loved one, or a professional wanting to develop their skills. I encourage you to share this episode if you'd like to help them out. And now, back to the conversation. But yeah, emotional regulation, when you think about it at its core, if it's not there, learning might not be possible, communication might not be possible, relationships might not be possible, or it will just be very challenging. So, just thinking about yourself, like I do yoga. I try to practice yoga every day. It doesn't always happen, but I can tell when I'm kind of in need for it. Like if I haven't done it in a week, I feel dysregulated. My head is a bit cloudy. I might be a little bit more grumpy. It's because I need the breathing practice and techniques kind of structured for me. So I totally understand.
Yeah. And there are books on yoga for autistic kids now.
Mm-hmm.
In programs I consult to, forget about behavior plans. We talk about developing emotional regulation plans because too often behavior plans are reactive. That, okay, we are seeing some problems. The child screams, he jumps to the floor, he bolts out of the classroom. Whatever might be the targeted area of concern. Okay. And we say, if we put a plan into place, and this sounds kind of idealistic, but we want to strive for the best. If we put a plan into place with the family from the time a person wakes up to the time a person goes to bed, then that in and of itself is going to prevent some of those quote unquote challenging behaviors that are targeted in behavior plans.
Mm.
So, for you, it's yoga. I always like to, joke that for some people, you have to have your first cup of coffee within minutes of waking up. For other people,
Right.
you have to get the kids dressed and off to school or yourself ready to get off to work.
Right.
And then you say, okay, all done. Now I can get on with my day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to think creatively about what are the kinds of supports, both self-regulatory supports, what people could do by themselves, as well as mutual regulatory supports. What can other people do for me? And can I accept that assistance?
Right.
And it's throughout the day. So I do workshops on problem behavior. And when I do live workshops, I ask people to take 10 minutes out and sketch out what their emotional regulation plan is on an ideal day. And people don't have any problems doing that. Well, when I wake up, this is the routine that works out best for me, and I need to do that. When I get to work, if I'm a teacher, I want to make sure that my classroom is, together. I have to put down on the whiteboard, or we used to call the blackboard, what's the schedule for the day, because that's what I go over with the kids. When I get home from work, I need to jog. I need to take a good jog, or I need to listen to some music, or I need a crunchy snack with a Diet Coke. It's like, so it's both physiological as well as things that help you feel like the day's moving along in a way that I'm grounded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We should be doing that with every neurodivergent individual because they're so much more vulnerable. I always have the problem of, not always, but we have a new puppy, okay? And he's very, very smart, and he's very active. And nobody else is at home right now. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details of that. But I knew before coming on this podcast with you that he needed to get some energy out. He's what we call for a child, a very high arousal child, okay? Very revved up, needs to get the energy out. I mean, we see that in ADHD and many autistic kids. Not all autistic kids are high arousal. Some are low arousal. But anyway, what did I do? I took him for a walk in the neighborhood. We have this little game where I throw balls down the basement stairs. He runs down the stairs, gets it, runs up the stairs. I had him do that 30 times because I knew if I didn't do that and let him be better regulated and get that energy out, that he would be barking like crazy while I'm trying to speak to you on this podcast.
Right. Yeah.
But he's not. He's quiet.
Mm-hmm. I haven't heard anything.
He's upstairs with this little chewy oral sensory input.
Mm-hmm.
He's upstairs in his favorite place, and I have some quiet music playing in the background.
Nice.
That was his emotional regulation plan for the time that I'm with you on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's all about knowing your child, knowing what they need, individualizing that plan for them, getting them involved also when possible.
And sometimes it could be fun.
Uh-huh.
I know parents who have access to a pool who hadn't gone swimming for years. Hey, I'm back in the pool swimming with my kid again.
Mm-hmm.
Walking the dog. There are so many things. I know there's a surfing program in this area in the summertime. And I know parents who never thought that they would get involved with a group of parents and kids in learning how to surf. So sometimes these kinds of activities actually get people out to have a healthier lifestyle themselves if it involves healthy activities to stay in
Right.
good shape. Yeah.
Well, those are some great ideas and tips.
Yep.
Okay, Barry, I'd like to transition now looking at the future. So you're over 5 decades in the field. What gives you hope now?
The fact that we're getting more accurate understanding of what the autistic experience is, and including the experience of neurodivergent people who may not have an autism diagnosis. The fact that autistic people are at the helm in many cases, and they are steering the ship. As a matter of fact, we are interviewing tomorrow on our podcast, and this probably won't be out for a few months though, an autistic woman who I know very well. Her name is Dina Gassner, who has a PhD in social work, and she's a researcher. So she's consulting to the federal government in the U.S. on research that involves autistic people. So I think the deeper understanding, the fact that we are respecting autistic people and we are really trying to put in place what they tell us has been most helpful for them. I think parents are getting much more accurate information and have access to many more kinds of supports. But I don't want to, paint a rosy picture.
Yeah. Well, what changes would you like to see? Like what's still left in autism research and support?
Yeah, I would say we still have to push back against miracle cures. We still have to push back against the notion that autism can be cured. It's a lifelong developmental disability. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have very positive outcomes. I mean, even after a bad start in life, many of the people we interviewed on our podcast, some of these people were suicidal in their 20s. They got late diagnosed people who got a diagnosis, who have found the right supports, who have a very positive quality of life now. So that's another thing that makes me very hopeful is that even people who've had, in some cases, dreadful experiences when they were young, psychiatric hospitalizations. A number of our guests were psychiatrically hospitalized. One guest who's now an OT had an eating disorder as well. And now they have somehow found and put together the means to have a good quality of life. In other words, it's never too late.
Yeah.
Based upon my book, Uniquely Human. Well, let me give you a specific example, an international example. I was contacted by a man named Saulo Barbosa from Brazil, who is a policeman in Brazil. He read my book a couple of years ago, and I'm just saying this because he said this. He goes, "Oh my God, it totally changed my life." He got a diagnosis of autism, and now what he does is he trains policemen and first responders across all of Brazil in how to understand and better support autistic and neurodivergent people. So this is our podcast that just came out a few weeks ago. His proficiency with English is minimal. So on the podcast, there was a translator, but his writing in English is very good. So we've become kind of email pen pals, and now we just met on Zoom. And if you listen to what he says about his history, he was physically abused, bullied as a youngster. Nobody understood him. But somehow he found that being a policeman was a really good job for the way his mind works. And then when he found out he was autistic, he said, literally on the podcast, he said, "I had no idea what my life would be like, but I certainly wasn't hopeful about it." And now he says, "I have a mission. I have a purpose. I am so proud of what I'm doing." He's getting all kinds of awards. He's been on TV in Brazil about what he's done. And we are profiling him in our new book. We're
Oh,
profiling a
amazing.
number of new people that we didn't speak about in Uniquely Human. Because in Uniquely Human, we talk a lot about autistic people and what their lives have been like. In this new book, we have a whole new group of people. And Saulo is one of them. And he sounds like a wonderful human being.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've heard also about people who kind of take their own personal experiences and because they're autistic, just apply what they're going through to other autistic people specifically going through that same thing. For example, we've had a guest on the podcast. Her name is Livia Sarah, and she's an eating disorder survivor.
Mm.
And so she talked a lot about the misdiagnosis of eating disorders but they were actually autistic traits. And so she now helps other autistic people who are kind of going through similar things with eating disorders and being misunderstood. So it's interesting how these self-advocates can really find their own place in the world to help other people related to what they're going through.
Thank you for sharing that. The OT who's autistic that we interviewed a couple of years ago, her name is Kim Cleary. The same story, or at least in general terms, the same story. She had an eating disorder, and she said on our podcast, and she shares this publicly, that her eating disorder was her way of coping with undiagnosed autism.
Mm.
It gave her a sense of control and predictability, but it's what we would call a maladaptive strategy. She was referred to hospice. She was so severely
Wow.
impaired with her eating disorder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now she's a very highly respected occupational therapist. She's married to a neurotypical man. And the last I heard, she's had a very good quality of life now, very active in what she does.
Mm.
But you're right. I mean, there are various aspects of the neurodivergent or autistic experience that people can speak to. So we have
Mhm.
had a number of autistic people. Let me give a shout out to Becca Laurie Hector.
Yes, we know her as well.
Oh, yeah, she's great. And I met Becca years ago. We were part of a project to develop a center that never really developed. And so she's a good friend. And Becca talks about how she was morbidly depressed in her 20s and was suicidal.
Mhm.
And now she online has a whole community of people, as you know, to support autistic people in having a good quality of life and addressing their mental health issues.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think it's also kind of our responsibility as podcasters to give these people a microphone, right? And so that they can also share their stories and inspire other people as well.
That's what we do and why we do it, isn't it?
Right.
Or it should be. And
Yeah.
it clearly is the case for you. So
Yeah.
congratulations. Yeah.
Well, likewise. Okay, Barry. So I'd like to close with one last question.
Sure.
What advice would you give to other professionals working with autistic individuals and families today?
Okay. And this is kind of what we're saying in our new book, but what we said in Uniquely Human as well. Be curious, listen, understand every individual is an individual. So when you hear things like, oh, this works for all autistic people, immediately that's a red flag for me. Okay. But be curious. Say, well, why do you say that? Okay. Understand that autism is a family and community experience. That once, and this is actually a quote I like to use, once you are in relationship with an autistic child or person, you are in relationship with that person's family and extended family. Meaning we all have to work together, we all have to collaborate, and we all have to be highly, highly respectful of autistic and neurodivergent people as uniquely human.
Mm,
And that's why I use that term. And each of us is uniquely human, but the problem is that many autistic and neurodivergent people are uniquely human in a way that they're misunderstood and too often mistreated and too often not given the opportunities that we all have in life. And so it's up to us to keep those doors open and providing support in a respectful way that is informed by what we're learning from autistic people.
amazing. Beautiful advice. Well, thank you, Barry. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And, you are a gift to the field. So thank you for all of your contributions over the years. And I'm excited to check out your new book when it comes out.
Yeah, thank you. And then let me just add one thing to what I just said.
Yeah.
Everybody who's listening should understand that autistic and neurodivergent people, in a sense, are a gift to us in our lives because we could learn so much more about ourselves and so much more about humanity. And so take this as an opportunity for your own growth as a human being.
Yeah. And maybe obviously other professionals in this field can relate, but since working with autistic people and hearing from autistic individuals through the podcast, like I've also gained some kind of compassion for just other people in the world as well. And I think that's what you're talking about, right? Like you
Exactly.
kind of just open your mind and your heart to understanding why someone might be saying something a certain way or coming from whatever background they're coming from. And so to just be open and curious to everyone, really. I don't want to diminish the autistic experience, but it kind of generalizes to just everyone.
And that's a big part of our new book. You'll learn a lot more about yourself. And let me add
Yeah.
one word to that, non-judgmental.
Okay. Yep.
Let's not, we live in a world where, unfortunately, I could speak in the US, where we're almost taught and trained to be judgmental of other people. And we have to fight against that.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. We'll close on this note and we'll put your links and everything in the show notes so people can follow you.
Great, Rachel. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And good luck on your continued work and that of the Global Autism Project. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with one person who you think will find value in it too. By doing so, you'll be helping our mission to improve access to autism services around the world. Thanks for listening. Take care.